Sometimes it starts in a grocery store. I'll see a congregant in Harris Teeter and they pull me aside and they say, "I've been meaning to call." And they tell me about a conversation at work or something their kid heard at school, and in a flash, they tell me that they've realized that being Jewish is going to cost them something in that moment. Maybe not physically, maybe it's socially, spiritually, relationally. And I can watch the instincts arrive often before the words do. The instinct to protect, the instinct to explain, the instinct to defend or to shut down, to disappear. None of these instincts are surprising. They are human and they come from somewhere. Because for long stretches of Jewish history, power was something exercised over Jews. Decisions were made about Jews, without Jews. Governments did not reliably protect. Sometimes they actively killed and expelled or humiliated. And the story was, again and again, that Jewish life could be tolerated until it could not. And then history turned. In Israel, Jewish sovereignty is the outcome of many Jewish stories converging at once. Jews who were already there, and Jews who returned, and Jews who fled Europe's catastrophe. Jews pushed out of Arab lands, and different languages and different memories, the same unrelenting question underneath it all. Can Jewish life be secured if we are always at the mercy of others? And a country was built to protect Jewish life. And once Jews created a sovereign state, Jews became responsible not only for survival, but for governance, for the use of force, for laws, and for the moral consequences of what a state does when its citizens are threatened. In America, Jews built something else, not sovereignty, but belonging, not control, but coalition. Jews here have always been a small minority, protected not by dominance, but by pluralism, by the belief that a society can be strong enough to make room for difference and fair enough to let minorities flourish. That civic commitment has held, imperfectly, and it now feels less secure than it once did. Those two real-world educations shape how Jews think even before we choose what to say. And as Tal Becker taught us last week, American Jewish life trained an instinct to build relationships of trust. Israeli Jewish life trained an instinct to build protection and strength. American Jewish life carries a fear of exclusion, and Israeli Jewish life carries a fear of annihilation. Different histories, different languages, and perhaps the same dread underneath, being unprotected. In a world that grows volatile, those instincts can collide, sometimes within our own Jewish family. Israelis can look at diaspora Jews and think, you do not understand what it means to live with enemies who are not only critics, but those who want your annihilation. And Jews in the diaspora can look at Israelis and think, you do not understand what it means to have your social belonging, your professional standing, your friendships, your children's schools suddenly become a referendum on whether Jews are safe and whether or not we belong, i.e. the conversation in Harris Teeter. Which brings us to Parashat Tetzaveh, to this week's Torah portion, to one of the quietest, most consequential commandments in the Torah, the commandment about the Ner Tamid, the eternal light. The Israelites are commanded to bring a pure olive oil, beaten for lighting, to raise up a lamp continually, a Ner Tamid. No miracle, no drama, just oil, a wick, and a flame that must not go out. Now, the Torah does not say, light it once and admire it. It says, tend it every single day. Because fire can do two opposite things. It can warm and illuminate, and it can consume and destroy. And the question is not whether fire exists. The question is whether it is tended. And it's interesting because power is just like that. Power can protect life, and power can create stability. Power can make room for a future, and power can also harden the heart. Power can turn fear into permission, and power can convince you that because you act, you are therefore right. The Ner Tamid is not warning us against strength. It is a demand that strength remained tended and bounded and answerable. And there is a temptation in certain moral climates to speak as if power itself is somehow shameful. And I don't think that's a Jewish instinct. Judaism does not sanctify helplessness. There can also be a temptation to treat Jewish strength as self-justifying, as if mere fact of sovereignty ends the moral conversation. And that should not be the Jewish instinct either. The question is not whether or not Jews should have power. The question is whether Jewish power stays inside the boundaries of Jewish moral discipline. And this week, the question arrived at one of the holiest places on earth. Many of you have stood at the Kotel. Some of you went with Temple Bethel on a congregational trip. Some may have known about the work of women at the wall and have stood in solidarity with the long struggle for egalitarian prayer for Jews at our holiest site. Some may have gone on your own at a moment in your life when you needed to stand at the wall and feel the weight of what it holds. And so you may know what it feels like, or you may have thought about what it feels like to press your hands against those stones, to feel the accumulated prayers of generations in the cracks, to stand there as a Jew and feel for a moment that you belong to something ancient and unbroken. And this week, the Israeli Knesset advanced a bill that would place all prayer at the Kotel under the sole authority of the Orthodox chief rabbinate. And if enacted, egalitarian prayer, the kind many of us have offered at the Ezrat Israel Plaza, could be treated as a criminal act. That is to say, women and men praying together at a special location near the Western Wall would be a criminal act with penalties of up to 7 years in prison. 7 years for praying at the Western Wall as a Jew. Now, the legislation did not arrive in a vacuum. Israel's High Court of Justice has recently instructed the government to move forward with the long-delayed upgrades to the egalitarian prayer area, a ruling that the government had resisted for years. And the bill is, in part, a direct response to that court order. It is not only a religious decision, it is a political one. And what it says, unmistakably, is this: some Jews belong at the wall and in the religious life of the Jewish state. And others of us, those in this sanctuary and at Temple Israel, do not. And we should be jailed for praying at the wall. And as the Reform movement has stated, the Kotel does not belong to one stream of Judaism. It is a national symbol of spiritual inheritance of the entire Jewish people. And I stand with that statement, fully and without reservation. But I want to sit with what this legislation actually does, beyond the politics. It narrows holiness. It says that divine presence, which has drawn Jews to the wall across centuries and continents and catastrophes, is only accessible in one approved form of religious practice. That the prayers of Reform Jews, of conservative Jews, of egalitarian Jews, of women who have prayed there for decades, people who have given their lives, literally, or their children have given their lives for the state of Israel, that those prayers and those people do not qualify. That the voice that you bring to God, if it doesn't conform to the Orthodox rabbinate's rules, is not only wrong, it is criminal. And that is not a Jewish idea. That is a political actor using the machinery of a state to decide who is a real Jew in their opinion. And when a state uses its power to narrow who belongs, when it takes the most sacred ground of a people and draws a line down the middle, something dims, a light dims. Not Israel's image, but the Jewishness of a state. Now, while the Kotel legislation is a direct challenge to who we are as Jews, it's also not the only place where this question is being asked. Because if this is how the government treats Jews, we can only guess at how it's treating Palestinians in the West Bank. Think about a Palestinian farmer whose family has tended the same olive grove for generations. They're not just property, they're memory and livelihood and identity. And in recent years, in recent weeks, some of those trees have been uprooted, burned, destroyed. Not by war, but by people who believe in the land belongs to them by divine right, and that the farmer's presence is an obstacle, real danger, real vulnerability, an unequal system pressing down. And in recent weeks and months and years, there has been a documented incident after incident after incident in which extremist settlers, whose representatives in the Knesset just forwarded the anti-Jewish legislation in the Knesset, the same people, have attacked Palestinian civilians, burned homes and vehicles, assaulted farmers, uprooted ancient trees, sometimes killed and driven families from the land their grandparents farmed. Just last week, a Palestinian American was killed in the West Bank by a settler, a case that shook many Jews and Palestinians in the United States. And we need to be able to say it plainly, with no hedging, that Palestinian lives are not theoretical. Harm being done in the name of Judaism is wrong, not only because it is strategically disastrous, but because it violates the most basic Jewish claim, the sanctity of Jewish life. Both the Kotel bill and the violence in the West Bank are symptoms of the same fracture, a government that seems willing to let discipline slip, that is making an active choice, at best to do very little, and at worst to foment division. When power is used to narrow who belongs, and when violence is met with hesitation, what dims is not only Israel's standing, but what dims is the Jewishness of the Jewish soul of the Jewish state. And so I want to encourage us that a Jewish state is not Jewish because Jews hold power. It is Jewish when Jewish ethics shape how power is used. When restraint is not weakness, when the law is not theater, when holiness is not decoration. And so we have to think about what this means for us here, because none of us are Israeli voters. We're not ministers or commanders, and still we are not untouched. I went to Israel and pushed these issues hard with Minister Sa'ar, the foreign minister of Israel, just a few weeks ago. And I explained that American Jews are living with the social cost of his government's certainties. And I explained that we are navigating workplaces and friendships, and that when Israel has become the kind of shorthand for a symbol of people who sort of use to sort each other into categories. And when that happens, the argument is no longer about what a government did last week. It becomes a demand, sometimes spoken, sometimes implied, that Jews have to prove a moral worthiness by distancing ourselves from our own people and our own country. This is not a conversation that we can accept on certain terms. First, what I think we have to do is refuse coercion. We cannot accept a world where Jews are told that the price of belonging is to renounce peoplehood or to deny Israel's right to exist. Second, we must refuse evasion. We will not protect ourselves by going morally quiet. We will not pretend that Jewish ethics only apply when the people causing harm are not us, or that harm done in our name is somebody else's problem. We can be pro-Israel and grieve what is being done to Palestinian lives and Jewish lives by extremists. We can love Israel and demand that the Kotel belong to all Jews. These are not contradictions. They are the same instinct that Jewish life and life in all forms deserves to be protected. And third, we must refuse disappearance, not only by speaking up, but by showing up, by being openly Jewish, by learning and praying and giving and serving and arguing for the sake of heaven, and in building a community with enough depth that it does not flicker under pressure. That is the Ner Tamid at work. Not a flare of outrage, but a steady flame of presence. Tend to the Ner Tamid. Tend to the light. Not as a metaphor for being perfect, but as a discipline of staying morally awake. Tend to it in how we talk. Tend it in what we refuse to excuse. Tend to it in what we refuse to ignore, even when it makes us tired. Tend to it in our capacity to stand at the wall and insist that every Jew has the right to be there. Tend to it so that Jewish survival and Jewish conscience remain bound together. The Ner Tamid. It's a steady light because we make it steady. May we have the courage to keep that light burning. Amen.